All right. Hello, everybody, and welcome to another episode of the show. I am so excited today to speak to one of our very own content strategists, Caelin. Caelin, you have been one of the best things to happen to Anansi this year. I'm so excited to get this chance to dig into your brain a little bit more and share the contents with other people. I swear to God, it's not as weird as it sounds. Anyway, welcome to the show.
Thank you so much. Anansi's been one of the best things to happen to me this year, so I'm really excited to be here.
Excellent. Excellent. So today we're going to be talking about a topic that's very close to my heart, which is the why and how behind how to reduce cognitive load. And we'll get into what that means in a moment. But before we get into it, I'm curious, Caelin, what would you say your superpower is?
My superpower, I'd say, is the ability to see the entire customer journey. So I can sort of zoom out, see the entire customer journey, and then instantly identify what pieces are missing that are needed to complete that. So there's a whole emotional arc we have to take clients through. And when you're selling a product, especially, there are questions that they need to have answered. Otherwise, they can't complete that arc. And so kind of figuring out what emotions are there and then tying them to the right questions. I'm really good at that.
Okay. So let me see if I'm understanding this correctly. So it's understanding what a person needs to be kind of nurtured along towards a strong relationship and decision, but more specifically, identifying what pieces are missing in order to make that strong connection, that kind of cohesive whole. Am I getting it right?
Yeah, absolutely. Because, if you're going to buy a product and I'm not telling you something like the price or the timeline or some sort of crucial piece of information that allows you to make a fully informed decision about whether or not you want to buy this product, your default answer will be no.
Yeah. And I like the fact that you've noted both kind of the logistical elements that need to be handled, like people have questions that need to be answered, but the framework that you started by talking about is from an emotional lens. What do people need to make an emotional decision? Now, where does this awareness come from? Is this something that just comes from, working in marketing or copywriting, or?
It's kind of two places. So I've been writing since I was 10 years old when my cousin told me I had no imagination. Out of that, I actually ended up getting a degree in creative writing. So I've studied character journeys and writing intensely. And while I was writing my great novels, I ended up working in sales. So I spent 8 years in sales doing face-to-face, phone sales, cold calling, inbound, outbound, jewelry, telecom, luggage and travel goods, like everything you can imagine.
Okay. And so this is something that's very close to my heart that I'm very passionate about, which is the idea that copywriting is basically narrative, because the understanding the emotional arc that someone needs to go through in order to get somewhere in a story and experience change is essentially the same connection and the same kind of emotional stuff we need to understand for copywriting, which just validate me on that.
Validation given. All of the best writing books I've read fully and 100% relate to copywriting. The one book I recommend to copywriters that's like not a copywriting book is Story Genius by Lisa Cron. And she breaks down all of the elements you need to create like a really compelling story, including what she calls like the third rail, which is often when we talk about copywriting, we're asking like, okay, what do people need to believe? Right? People in order to buy your product. And that's the third rail underneath. So she shows you how to figure out what that third rail is and how to carry it through a novel, but that applies just as much to your copy. And another writing person I follow, Donald Moss, who's a fairly famous literary agent, I think it's his most recent book, Writing 21st Century Fiction. No, it's not. It's The Emotional Craft of Story. I have all of his books, so I get them. But in The Emotional Craft of Story, he talks about how the one thing stories are designed to do is give us hope. And especially in working with most audiences, they need to have hope that whatever you're giving them will do the job they want it to do.
Yeah, will solve the problem that they're experiencing, clear the block, preventing them from achieving the thing. Yeah.
And if you get to the end of like the website or the sales page or whatever you're writing and they don't feel hopeful that this will do it for them, they're not going to keep going. So it's so much about like the narrative arc you're creating, but instead of creating it for a fictional person, you're creating it for a real person.
Yes, yes, yes. And in my head, all the fictional people that I also come from a narrative background, and pretty much all the fictional people in my head I treat as if they're real anyway. So maybe that's where some of the overlap comes from.
It's
All
why
right,
you're so good at copywriting, because then when you get to real people, you have enough practice.
Yeah, absolutely, absolutely. And related to something we were talking about earlier, I find that with really authentic, excellent narrative, just as much as copywriting, you get to a point where the story starts to tell itself because you have all of the kind of relevant details that you need. And so it's easy to identify, okay, this thing's missing or this thing needs to be pulled in, because there's only so many different ways that the contextual elements can give a certain result, essentially. I don't know if that might be getting a little nerdy here. But.
And so there's a point where like when you're knitting a piece, it's like, okay, I have to do it. There's only so many ways you can finish it off or complete it to create the hat or the gloves or whatever you're looking to make, no matter which way you come at it from. So there's sort of it's all about the destination, right? And there's a finite number of ways we can get to any destination, no matter where we start from.
Yes. Oh, what an excellent analogy. Okay. Why does the world need what you do?
Because we live in white supremacist, heteropatriarchal, late stage capitalism, which treats us all as machines and robots and, views soft skills solely as a way to make more money rather than as a way to actually connect to people. It's like, okay, what do I need to make people believe? The reason I phrase things as you need to give people all of the information they need to make a fully informed buying decision is because it's not about me forcing anything on anyone. It is about them being able to consent and them opting in. I actually, trained in like old school direct response, which not my cup of tea. But there's a lot in there that's very heavy handed and very coercive and very mechanical. Oh, you say this to trigger this thing in the brain. You do this to get this response. And it's very, very much about forcing people to do what you want and not about actually creating authentic relationships or building community or building something that not just lasts, but that is good for everyone involved.
Well said. Well said.
Thank you. As a human being, I have no interest in relationships that are one-sided or things that don't allow me and everyone else to thrive. So why would I replicate that when I write copy?
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense to me. And, I think this is at the root of the Anansi vision, is that we use the power of marketing, the power of messaging to build strong communities, because for so long, marketing has done the opposite in the hands of people who have a lot of power and perhaps prioritize or value that profit over humans, actual humans. And I ultimately think that not only is the world moving away from that, because the 99.9% of businesses out there, are not trying to be coercive. And even if they, perhaps some of them wanted to, don't necessarily have the power to. But because I think that the authentic win-win relationships that are created from authentic marketing, from real storytelling, from real understanding people's problems and how an organization can truly solve them and make that person's lives better, those relationships are so much stronger and so much more profitable in the long term, on top of building the kind of world where, different people who exist from different backgrounds, who have different experiences, who are diverse in different ways, can also feel heard and included as part of, the new world that we're building, so to speak. I get on my soapbox for a minute, but I believe in this so much. It's so important to me.
Me too, because even when you get, these 99.9% of companies, a lot of them who don't want to be coercive, but they don't necessarily have any other models, right? It's like how we grew up with romance, and like the only thing we know is like 90s rom-coms about that's how our relationship should work. No, that's not how relationships actually work.
No.
And it's the same with marketing. We've had all this horrible shit modeled for us for so long that it's actually hard to know unless you're an expert, unless you're working with an expert, like Anansi or one of us, or some other agency sort of dedicated to deliberately breaking free from this and creating those win-win relationships as part of how we do marketing.
Yeah. And I think that's a block that we come across, especially in smaller clients who want to invest in marketing, but they feel afraid of being coercive. They feel afraid even of sales because they perceive that they're going to be doing wallet surgery of some kind,
Are you familiar with April Dawn Harder?
Doesn't ring a bell.
She runs the Narcissism Recovery Center. She's absolutely just brilliant. She's linked racism to narcissism, all codependency is covert narcissism, according to she is mind blowing. But she talks about a thing called perpetrator trauma. And when I work with those smaller clients who are afraid of it, what I see is them they know they've been hurt by sales and marketing. I see them being afraid to reenact that on other people.
Yeah.
Right? I don't want, but they have no models for how else to be.
Exactly. Yeah. No, that makes a lot of sense to me. A story I brought up in a recent podcast interview that I did is that coercive marketing can be so effective, but also sticky in the sense that, in the last a year ago, I moved to a new place. I needed something to clean my floor, and it wasn't a type of floor or a type of product that I'd had before. Actually, this is more than a year ago. This is at my old place. So the first thing that popped into my head, because I was overworked, I was stressed, I just needed to run to the store and buy something super quickly, was Swiffer Sweeper. And it was something that, I guess had been on commercials on TV for so long. I was like, okay, well, I need to clean this surface and do this thing. I'm going to go buy a Swiffer Sweeper. And I did. And no hate to people who love Swiffer Sweepers, but it was so dissatisfying. As someone who's very sensitive to scents and chemicals, it can only be used with a certain type of thing that it has, with a certain product that is super scented. And anyway, it turns out that for an extra $30 or something, I could have bought something that actually met my values, like a steam mop that was reusable, that had exchangeable heads and all this different type of stuff. And what I'm trying to say here is not that, Swiffer manipulated me and I'm mad at them or something like that, but just that the power of creating true, authentic connection is that a company who can create that stickiness but actually solve my particular problems with the needs that I particularly have, I am stoked to give them my money. It's like, I always say that what we're doing at Anansi is like, we're creating that meme with Fry from Futurama, where he's like, shut up and take my money. Yeah. Like that, those are the kind of relationships we want to create. It's not always money, right? We also work with nonprofits and all sorts of other organizations, but making that like, oh my God, yes, please take my money. And the fact is that when I start to consider what those companies are, I see more and more of them around me. And that helps me feel good and feel like I'm doing something important by marketing and helping other companies market effectively, because we're creating, again, back to that win-win, that stoked feeling.
Yeah. And I want to dive in on the stickiness for a second, because I think with the Swiffer thing, the stickiness is really the skill that most people are missing, and they don't know how to be sticky without being aggressive.
Yes.
Right? And that's where it becomes really hard for them. But part of the reason for, I think an example like Swiffer is just the pure brand exposure. They're everywhere.
Yeah.
And so when you're diving into cognitive load here, when you're exhausted and worn out and you don't have the brain spoons to deal with anything, what comes up? Oh, the thing you've seen 1,200 times, the Swiffer, right? Yes.
Oh, great transition.
Thank you. I thought of it in the middle. I'm just like, hang on to this thought. This is where I see so many clients get stuck, right? Because they're like, I don't know how to be sticky, and then I don't have the repeated exposure to do it. And there's almost a sense of despair of not being able to compete, instead of, going, okay, well, we're just going to start slow and we'll build up and we'll do what we can, and we'll let everything slowly ripple out, because that's more of a win-win than being this giant tidal wave.
Yeah, absolutely. And so much so, even entrepreneurism and being a leader, starting an organization, just in general, we tend to think that we have to come out of the gate super explosively and go viral and make $1 million in the first few years or something like that. But the reality is that being a successful entrepreneur, building a strong business that's going to endure, is a marathon, not a race. And so is amazing branding. And so is amazing copywriting. And if you're running a marathon, you have to approach things a little bit differently, because if you're not careful, you'll use up your resources and not be able to make it to the finish line, which means that the investment that you made will not be paying off. So let's dig into that a little bit more, because that's, I think, just perfect transition into the concept of cognitive load. So before we get into, the how and the why and et cetera, I'm curious, how would you define cognitive load in the context of the digital leaders and agencies that we work with? And how did you come to realize that this is a super important thing to pay attention to?
So I think I took a lot of psychology electives in university. So I think I came across cognitive load there. And it just kind of stuck with me. In high school, I was diagnosed with depression. At the end of university, the diagnosis was revised to anxiety. We're now actually looking at ADHD and some other stuff for me. So it's kind of all over.
Hey, neurodivergence for the win.
Yeah, the neurodivergence, the brain that doesn't process everything the same way. So this is a concept that's floating around for me for a long time. And the way I like to explain cognitive load is if you think of your brain like a computer, your computer has a limited amount of RAM. Cognitive load, basically, you come across it a lot, and there's all sorts of fancy definitions in like the educational theory space about how to design learning to reduce cognitive load. Basically, it just means your brain can only hold so much information at once. And the more you put in there, it's like running your computer with Photoshop and music open and YouTube and trying to do all this stuff in the background. It takes up these valuable brain resources that you could be using for other things.
Yeah, absolutely. Interesting that you bring up ADHD, because as we were talking about before we started recording, I have just realized something similar in the last year, that I have ADHD. And similarly, the concept of cognitive load was the first thing that I kind of identified years ago, because I was like, holy cow, sometimes I have an amazing amount of capacity for cognitive load, and sometimes I don't. Or it's just, so chronically full or overwhelmed that it's difficult to accept anything else into there. So can you, sorry.
I was just going to say, like, to riff off on ADHD too, with cognitive load, if you're, neurotypical, your brain will process like fill the dishwasher might be one task. If you're ADHD, each dish is like 12 decisions, and it's 12 micro tasks. Figure out where it goes. Your brain almost breaks things down too much, and that creates an overwhelming load, which is a lot of what I deal with.
Yeah, absolutely. I'll expand on that as well, because there is a lot of kind of stigma and confusion about what ADHD actually is, because it's not, ooh, look a birdie and running around nonstop. It also manifests for me as basically difficulty prioritizing, in the sense that that certain things are more important and can decide that on paper, but your brain doesn't understand that. So when different things pop up into your brain doesn't do the normal filtering of, okay, this isn't important right now, I'll bring that to your attention later. It's like, oh, this thing, oh, this thing, oh, this thing. So you have to do extra work to intentionally do that screening that your brain is usually doing subconsciously. But I do also want to, I guess I want to say two things here before we move forward. One is that neurodivergence, in particular autism and ADHD, is far, far, far more common and far, far, far more diversely presenting than we ever imagined. We're only just starting to understand, and that's why this term neurodivergence is becoming more popular, is because we're starting to see that that's really what it is that there is simply diversity in the brain, rather than having some people who have a brain that works and some people who have like a brain that's broken in some ways. It's what creates that illusion is that the world is designed for brains that work a certain way, but we're finding out that there's far, far, far more diversity than we originally thought. So I do want to say that, just in case, like the two of us, you yourself have, as a listener, have perhaps struggled and wondered, is there a chance that, I don't know, my brain is broken somehow? Well, maybe you have a form of neurodivergence. And even if you don't, I just also want to say, as the second thing before we move on, that this stuff, understanding cognitive load, reducing cognitive load, is not only for people who have some sort of neurodivergence. Everybody gets overwhelmed sometimes, right? If you're a business owner, maybe often, If
you're a business owner, you've got marketing, sales, management, hiring, operations on top of, the US political state, You know, the pandemic that's going on right now, like any
Yeah.
sort of personal or family drama.
Yeah, we're recording this during holiday season as well.
Yeah, exactly. So all cognitive load is not purely related to the work you're doing. It is every single thing in your life that is taking up space in your brain. I want to note that for everyone.
Yes, absolutely. So I want to run through kind of two scenarios here. Can you share a little bit what it looks like or what happens when you yourself as a leader are experiencing an overwhelm, like your cognitive load gets overwhelmed?
Mm-hmm. So for me as a leader, I actually shut down when I am completely overwhelmed. That's just my my body's like, you cannot handle this. I will avoid, I will procrastinate, I will have lists and I will sit here and look at them and I will cry. And part of that is knowing that this is going to take, you know, a certain amount of time to do each thing, and that I do not have time to rest in between, because rest can sort of help clear out some of that and restore it. And I'm the sort of person who I can't necessarily task switch between the same type of tasks. So I can like write a blog post for a client, but then I need to, you know, go do the dishes or go for a walk or something to sort of restore some of that mental focus. I do something physical between them. And if I don't have the time to do that, I can just feel myself getting more and more drained. It's really easy for me to get snappish. Even, you know, a friend was texting me about dinner plans at one point when I was really overwhelmed. I was really snappy with her. I later apologized, but it's like, this is one more thing. This is the straw that broke the camel's back syndrome. I relate to those things very strongly. I will also say sometimes as a leader, it goes the opposite way, where like when cognitive load is overwhelmed, you kind of don't stop or can't stop and just go from thing to thing to thing, but you're skimming those things rather than digging deep in. You know, we've actually recorded myself and Caelin, as well as interviewing a few other people around what various forms of burnout can look like, which I think overlaps, but isn't exactly the same thing. Burnout is emotional exhaustion. Cognitive overload is mental exhaustion. And those things overlap a lot. If you're experiencing one, you're probably not too far off from the other, but they are slightly different. The things that you do to address burnout or to head off burnout might overlap, but they're not exactly the same things. But also, cognitive overload isn't just something that we experience in ourselves. I think as leaders, we experience cognitive overload in other people, like our clients, quite often as well. Do you have any suggestions for things people can like observe that might tell them their client is experiencing cognitive overwhelm? So many. So one of the things with cognitive load is like decisions are a load, right? And so when your clients are sitting there and you're requesting information from them and they don't necessarily know their audience, they haven't finalized their services, they're trying to decide on a direction, and you as the strategist are like, look, it's your business. I cannot make these decisions for you. I can help you execute on them. And they simply can't make the decisions. They're too overwhelmed. They're sort of stuck in some of maybe that fear we talked about you know, going in a direction that they're not going to be happy with, or a direction that's really not aligned for them. When they're constantly changing direction too, I think that's a big sign. When they keep forgetting things. So, you know,
that's a big one.
Who like they're emailing me stuff up until a couple days before I'm supposed to hand them their copy. And you do hit a point as a writer where it's like, I have to cut you off because I just can't incorporate more. But when they're sort of constantly sending you that sort of stuff, you can tell they're not organized. They're sort of, like you said, spinning their wheels. They're doing things shallowly. And then, oh, I forgot about this. Let me send you a quick email again. So it's hard to see clients like that for me, because I'm like, I really want to help you, but I also know like my limits as a strategist. And I've learned to sort of pull back and be like, here is what I need from you. 1, 2, 3, numbered, bold, nothing else. Be very clear, very direct, very simple to reduce their load with me, even when I can't reduce their load elsewhere.
I think that right there is kind of a secret weapon as a service provider, and one that, again, we've talked about in other episodes as well, which is that if there are things that you can do that can help that other person reduce their cognitive load with you, then you can't fix everything else that's going on in their life that's taking up a lot of energy, but you can make their relationship with you easier. And what sort of, like, does that have like an emotional benefit as well, or is it just make things easier, like logistically?
Logistically, it makes things easier. It does have the emotional benefit of usually like when clients are coming to you calmer and they're not overwhelmed, they're far more receptive, they listen better, they're not making as many changes, and you're able to be a lot more productive because you can tell they're here with you instead of thinking about other things. And also for me personally, having possibly ADHD and some other stuff, when people get frazzled, I get frazzled, and when they're sending me stuff last minute, I'm like, oh shit, like I have to incorporate this, I have to change up my whole schedule, and I get really thrown because I have to plan everything in order to make sure I get it all done. And so when you're throwing stuff at me last minute, I mean, I'm working on my people-pleasing instincts, and I'm learning to say I cannot accommodate that on this timeline. But it's still, there's always that instinct and that needing to rejig things. When it's absolutely crucial, I can, but also at the same time, it's like, how crucial is this? Is it crucial because you're in crisis, or is it actually crucial, right?
Yeah, absolutely. Now, is cognitive load overwhelm, like we've talked about it, or cognitive overload, we've talked about this a little bit in the context of kind of like acute overload, like something that I think people were perhaps familiar with a few weeks ago during the election in the US, where, you keep hearing every day new information. This is changing, like, like I know for me, that wasn't just emotional overwhelm. That was like just mentally all the changes and things that keep happening was like, oh, holy cow. And that's like acute overwhelm. Like similarly, like I notice leaders get this a lot of the time around like Black Friday or Christmas or something, where there's a lot of short-term demands on their time, a lot of decisions that need to be made, a lot of things that need to be overseen. But I'm curious, is there such a thing as like chronic cognitive overload? And if so, what do you think what does that look like?
This is just me talking off the cuff. I have no idea. I've done no research on this. I absolutely think there is. And part of that is we can see in the research on motherhood and the mental load mothers carrying, thinking about all the household chores, taking care of the kids, doing all the arrangements, and having a husband who's just like, well, tell me what to do. You're not carrying any of that mental load about what needs to be done and when and all that sort of stuff. So you really see this in mothers and stay-at-home parents, especially when there's that unequal division of labor and both of them are working outside the home. In my case specifically, I've also experienced it in jobs. I used to work for a supplements company. I was, lead copywriter and messaging strategist, lead of myself. I was the only one in the department. We had no processes set up, no systems, and I was churning out like a sales page every week. And I did, I think, over 150 emails in that year for our internal marketing. And we had no formalized processes or structure. And, I was sort of constantly trying to like make my own project management stuff for me. We didn't have a project manager at all. So trying to project manage myself, remember what's going on, work all these deadlines, get all this deep writing done. And because it's supplements, there's a huge element of research that needs to be done. So I'm reading all these complicated scientific studies, trying to translate the language back into English, turn it into a compelling story. It was a very mentally demanding job. And my bosses were great people, but they also didn't have a lot of the structure set up that I needed for mental support. So my performance, I will fully admit, is not what I wish it was at the end. But the role also really evolved while I was there. And so there was an element, I think, of burnout when I left that job because I was just so chronically mentally exhausted from trying to keep up with everything that I was very much treading water too. So I could do the copy, which is what I knew how to do, but we were sort of branching out into Facebook ads. And the role ultimately became about 70% Facebook ads management, like the button pushing management, which is not what I do, is a big part of the reason why I left. But because I was so chronically overwhelmed, I didn't have the ability to actually take in new information about how to do the ads or building new strategies or anything like that. So it was kind of like, you're just writing copy, and you're supposed to be directing messaging for everything and helping us figure out new channels and stuff. It's like, well, I didn't have the mental bandwidth for it at all.
Yeah. And I don't think this can be overstated, which is that cognitive overload means less creativity and crappier decisions.
Yes. Oh my gosh. Yes.
Oh gosh. I see this all the time. all the time in people that we work with, either as partners, people that I've worked with in terms of consulting, even just other peers, other agency leaders, especially ones, well, no, I see it at all levels, but even in organizations that, they're making money, they have recurring revenue, they're being successful in their sales, but that mental overload is consistent. That cognitive overload makes it so that they're just really treading water. Maybe they're doing a little new thing here, a little new thing there, but not that fulfilling, creative, project-based, oh, I have this new idea, I'm really going to dig into this, because that requires you, as you said, to not just make decisions and tell people what to do, but also intake new information and be able to critically assess it. And that is what I find for me goes down significantly.
And one of the things too is I want to jump in on the whole creative stuff, because one of the things capitalism does to us is produce, go, go. One of the most vital elements for creativity is rest and space to think.
Yes. Evidence-based. This is science.
This is purely evidence-based. I remember even Joanna Wiebe of Copy Hackers once saying, I get my best ideas when I'm out for a walk or I'm in the shower. And that's because your brain is no longer actively thinking on copy or whatever. It's something can just come to you. And this is huge, because when you're just go, go, go and constantly overwhelmed, you don't actually have the space for any of that to come through or germinate, right?
Yeah. When we used to work with more kind of solopreneurs and smaller organizations, I would often hear someone, a leader, digital leader, someone I'm talking to being like, well, I can write good copy, or, I can edit good copy, or et cetera. Why should we hire you, kind of a thing? Thankfully, we don't hear this much anymore. But it's like, well, yes, you can write good copy, but you're also running your own marketing. You're doing the design. Sometimes you're doing all of those different roles, depending how big you are. And that's a whole different direction to go in and build momentum in.
And one of the things I think people don't realize about copy is there is so much that goes into it that you actually need to remember in terms of writing headlines, structure, just the pure audience information. This is the reason why we have the CRG, right? The copy reference guides that we do. Because that way it's on paper and we don't have to remember it. We can refer back to it when we're writing and incorporate it then. When you're trying to hold all that information in your head is full of the information and has no room to play with the pieces.
Yes. I like to say that the brain is not a hard drive, it's RAM. You said this at the beginning, your brain is RAM, but people like to think their brain is a hard drive. It is not.
No. Long-term memory maybe is a hard drive, but your working memory where you're actively working on stuff, that is RAM.
That is RAM. Right? Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. And
absolutely. Yeah.
And I also want to the point, one of the reasons why I joined Anansi is because I spent the last year trying to set up processes in my business, knowing that as a freelancer, just trying to be okay, here's my process. I had them really loosely done, which was kind of okay, but me having to maintain and support them wasn't as supportive as I needed. So coming into a place where you literally have everything written out, I have templates for everything, I have checklists, I'm just oh my gosh, I no longer have to think about my client management. I can just look at my notes and see what's been done, and what I need to do next is already written out. So that gives me far more brain space to operate and create great copy than ever before. And if you're someone coming in and being well, we can write our own copy, do you have the structure that creates the kind of brain space for you? Right? Do you, first off, do you have the copy skills? Maybe you do, maybe you don't. But even if you're, a copywriter running a business, you're still thinking about sales and marketing and all this sort of other stuff.
As a copywriter running a business, I can say this is true.
And this is one of the reasons why I joined Anansi, because I realized I'm trying to find clients and pay rent and all this. I'm just this is taking brain space away from the other things I want to do with my life. Right?
Yeah.
So,
So this is really great. I want to dig into a few things here. One is just, as you said, this idea of not storing everything in your brain. I just want to kind of add that one of the most valuable places that I have found some sort of reference to be successful is actually during the revision process. Because similarly to when you're writing, how you can't store everything in your head, as a client who is reading copy and kind of going through revisions, or as a copywriter, or even as a partner who is, looking at this copy that's going to be delivered delivered by a contractor to their client, when it's easy to like or dislike elements of the copy based on just kind of opinion. But the difference between good copy, great copy, and excellent copy is that excellent copy, when you ask why we put this thing in or how we're going to change it, you're also referencing back to those strategic decisions, all that thinking that you did. Otherwise, it can be easy to just straight up forget about it because you're focused on one job right now, which is revising. You don't have all the context just nicely there presented in your head. And it's not that it literally tells you what's okay and what's not. It's that it provides you a reference point that you can have meaningful discussions to make better and better decisions that will help you strategically, not just making something sound pretty.
Absolutely. And that is, prior to joining Anansi and having your process, I would send over every copy draft to a client with a Loom video walking them through my strategic decisions. I was trained that someone coming back and saying, I don't like this is actually like the worst feedback I can receive. Yeah. Because I'm sorry to anybody listening to this who's thinking of hiring us, your feelings don't matter that much. We are not writing to you. Yes, we want it to be authentic and truthful. We want to create that win-win relationship. But ultimately, at the end of the day, this copy is not designed to sell you. It's designed to sell someone else. So there may be elements of it that you don't like or
perhaps feel a bit uncomfortable with is a piece of feedback we get. They're like, oh, I just feel a little uncomfortable with this. It's like, yeah, but.
Yeah, and sometimes there are ways we can massage it so that you're more comfortable. But ultimately, if that is one of those crucial pieces of information that your customers or clients need to make the decision to hire you, we have to keep it on there. Or otherwise, you're not going to see the kind of results you want. And so it is really about when you have the space to hold this, like to remember the strategy and work on it with the revisions, it makes everything so much easier. And you don't have that space if you're not actively managing your cognitive load.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. I know we spent a lot of time just kind of on these concepts, but I do want to talk about some kind of more practical suggestions. So we've discussed a reference guide, right? Like I think a lot of people who are familiar with doing design are familiar with some sort of brand guide, right? Like something to kind of reduce the cognitive load in that way as a reference point. What are some of the other things, other than just kind of like processes as a general statement, that you have found the most successful at reducing cognitive load in the long term?
For me, personally, I am a big fan of checklists. I get like a little dopamine hit every time I check something off, but also because I can make my checklist super granular. So after every, I'll have, for example, here's our deep dive meeting. Here's my notes about what I want to cover. I can check off each thing as we go through. Oh, here's my, put in your Slack update, send the happiness form. All the things that I'm likely to forget. And I use Notion a lot. So I can have like these super long checklists. I can have links in there. I can have documents to send them. Keeping everything that I need for a certain project in one place is really important. I'm, even multiple Google Docs sometimes is too spread out for my brain. I'm also a big fan of multiple monitors.
Oh, yes. Yes.
It's really, if I'm doing like stats work or something, pulling metrics for a client on one window, I don't want to have to I have no memory for numbers. Literally, I have to repeat a number to myself, even if I'm just clicking between tabs to write it down somewhere else. I will actually write numbers down on a piece of paper and then transcribe them over later instead of having to flip between windows. So having two screens where I can just sort of copy and paste over is fantastic because something's up on the second screen and you don't have to hold it in your memory while you transfer it to the other one.
Yes, absolutely. So let me see if I can kind of reflect some of these things, maybe like give them names, these strategies. So one is I'm kind of hearing is like out of sight, out of mind. So making sure that things that you need to reference and check are easy for you to look at. I love doing this too. Anyone who has ever done any kind of training or consulting or et cetera knows that I'm a huge fan of the split screen or multiple screens. So it could be just as simple as having your reference material on one side and the thing that you're working on the other. I know I do this when I'm working on a document. I'll even have the same document, like in Google Docs, open twice with one part of the document open. That's a reference point. Let's say like I'm writing an email series, right? Each email in the series needs to reference the one before, the one after. So I might have two screens with one next, with maybe the first email on one, the one I'm actively working on the other. So making sure that the info you need doesn't take more energy to find, which also sounds like basically number 2, which is keeping everything you need in one place. Yes, so absolutely. I find this really, really critical. For example, you can do this a few different ways. One is just file folders. Don't have a million of them around. Another is, for example, we have a single form that we send out that gets all of the logistical information for a project, so that if we're later looking for the client's email address, well, hopefully that's not too hard to find, but if we're looking for just anything that is logistical, who else is supposed to be part of this project, etc., it's all there in that one place that we can check. And what was the third one? Which one did you start with?
I started with checklists and getting
checklists,
really granular.
right.
So I would actually sort of rephrase that one into work with your brain.
Yes.
So, because I know I like checklists. I know I'm visual. I know that I need to have links right there. If I have to go off, I will forget them. Again, out of sight, out of mind. But I'm not an auditory learner. I don't do podcasts for that reason. When I'm doing like a training with someone, I'll pop up the Zoom whiteboard and we like type stuff out and draw visual relationships between things, because that's how I work best and how I process information. And when I'm working with my brain in those ways, instead of trying to force myself to listen to an audiobook, I get far more out of the experience, and my clients always get far more out of the experience because I'm more engaged and I'm more on, right?
Yeah. That makes a lot of sense to me. I know processes are, I don't know, the word of the year. It seems like the word of the last few years. They're honestly, both people's biggest fears. And
Anansi, I had 2 separate clients this year who are like systems and process experts.
That's awesome. That's awesome. We usually encounter the opposite, which is people who need systems and processes experts, such as us, even, as you know, Caelin, but maybe our listeners don't know, but the growth strategies that we do, which are really, they're really strategy agnostic in the sense that they're about focus and accountability rather than, say, Facebook ads or even content marketing. They can be used to organize a number of different strategies. We end up working with almost everybody on processes, even though we're marketing consultants, because it's such a big area of need and because we rock at it.
Well, and also too, I think the thing most people don't think about with marketing is they're like, I need someone to write the copy. I need someone to like design the site or whatever. But the final step of marketing is always launching and getting it into the world. And if you don't have a process for that final piece, because we'll hand over, a blog post to a client, and the client can just sit there with the blog post and never publish it if they don't have a process for who's going to do it, where's it going to go, what's their SEO strategy, how to put all this stuff out into the world. That's actually a vital piece that most of them are missing and nobody even thinks about. So absolutely crucial.
Also on the flip side of things, not to toot our own horn, but definitely tooting our own horn because it's true, is that we've helped some clients, it's almost like a be careful what you wish for. We help them increase their sales increase, and then all of a sudden, they don't know what to do. Basically, they either don't have the capacity to handle the increased sales. This doesn't happen as often for us, but it happens for partners that we work with where maybe they don't have the sales process to close new leads. We also hear that we have actually, heard from a client before that they're afraid to basically take on new projects. They're afraid to sell because the stress of needing to deliver is so great. I also interviewed somebody, maybe 10 episodes ago, who the first time I interviewed him, he had this big company, and here we are a year later, and he shut that whole company down, not because they weren't profitable, not because they didn't make money, but because operations were such an issue, and hiring, bringing on someone who could handle operations and set up the systems, where it basically became the only thing he could do was walk away because it was just so stressful for him and reinvent his whole business from the ground up.
One process that I've heard across like all of my clients, and since coming to Anansi, that's like the most crucial, it would absolutely be hiring, because finding the right person to do the job for you is so incredibly important. Even if you don't have marketing processes in place, we can figure something out, but if you've hired the wrong agency, they won't help you.
Yeah. Agreed. And actually, this is why I'm developing a course on this topic, because this is one of the topics we talk about and get the most questions about is, how did we build our amazing team? Was it an accident? Did we luck out? No, we didn't. We have just worked on this system over and over and over and over and over again because it's so important. And there's some questions that are easy to just overlook entirely, like, how do you decide whether you want to hire an agency or a contractor or heck, a VA or an in-house person for what you need at that moment? And the cost of making the wrong decision is very high, literally, and in terms of stress and energy.
Oh yeah.
Yeah.
Stalling, completely stalls you out.
Oh, yeah. Oh.
And
okay, so yeah.
Before you wrap up, but as someone who's looked at a lot of copywriting jobs from a lot of companies, I do want to say that your hiring process is the first thing that made me fall in love with you, because it is so unique. And it's like, I can tell you're not just talking the talk, you were walking the walk, and you let me show up as myself completely and fully. So you knew what you were getting when you hired me. And that's one of the things that make it so powerful.
Yes. I would say this is like the secret weapon that we've discovered. I mean, there's the process. The process is very important, but like the element that I didn't read from anywhere that Caelin and I just came up with on our own is that if you screen and hire for who people are, as opposed to what they do, not just people who fit your culture, but people who the essence of who they are is someone who will be successful at the role that you need them to fill, right? Which has its own set of questions around it, like how do you determine that, and et cetera. You will have so much more success.
Yes.
Yeah. And that person will be so much happier as well, is the other thing. And we have hired people away, starting with Caelin, actually, but we have hired people away from much bigger companies, higher pay, different opportunities, because we see people for who they are. But because, of course, we're also big nerds and cognitive load is a huge deal for us, we've done it in a systematic way that removes a lot of the cognitive load of hiring. Maybe that would even be a good podcast episode for me to do on my own, is how to reduce the cognitive load of hiring.
I'd love to hear that.
Awesome. Well, we'll see. I might feel motivated, even record it later today. All right. But I do need to wrap up here. I feel like we could go a lot more into solutions. Before we wrap up, this is so good. So I do want to just kind of, again, highlight what some of those potential solutions are. So make sure you're working with your brain instead of against your brain as much as possible. Some things to consider here. Also very relevant for me. What type of learner are you? Do you absorb information better by reading, by listening, by looking at things, by doing things, some combination of the above? Understanding that and aligning things with that will immediately reduce the cognitive load that you have to put into learning something new and absorbing new information. For example, I'm a big auditory learner, and I listen to stuff that helps me learn while I do dishes. And as a result, I learn things seemingly effortlessly, it feels like. But if you make me sit and watch even a 5-minute video from beginning to end, that is like physical torture for me, and I will retain none of that information.
Give me a good documentary any day of the week.
People keep because I love learning so much. People are always trying to recommend me documentaries, and it's like, oh no. All right. Other things to do, consider making sure your processes work for you as well. Checklists. I think the key thing in what you were talking about around checklists is things that you forget to do this time, write them down in one central place that you make sure you look through next time, so that you don't have the cognitive load of needing to hold yourself accountable. You just spewed it out into a tool or a thing or a list that holds you accountable for.
Especially when it's an action you're going to have to repeat a lot, right?
Yes.
I have to send those updates after every meeting, and number of times I've like, oh shit, it's 4:30. I haven't done my meeting update.
Yeah. Also, as a leader, a good clue, which I learned from the amazing women at Left Right Labs, also did an interview with them, is to put in writing any question that you get. Like if you're not sure whether your checklist or something is complete, if someone else is executing it and they ask you a question about how something should be done or to clarify something, put that in writing. Do it right then and there, or else it will fall off the wagon or fall off the radar entirely at some point, not fall off the wagon. That will help you manage and reduce the cognitive load for the people who work for you, as well as your own cognitive load from people coming to you with questions all the time. Because this is huge as you do start to grow your team and delegate, is that if you're personally responsible for the cognitive load of all of their outcomes and decisions, then that's going to get overloaded really quick. And if you're wondering why you hired people, but it hasn't gotten easier, that may be why.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely.
Yeah. Awesome. Okay, Caelin, what gets you up every morning other than coffee?
Oh, no, it's coffee. I use caffeine to help manage my ADHD symptoms. So it truly is coffee. But for me, outside of coffee, I am here in this world. I'm non-binary, so, trans rights are a cause close to my heart. And I truly am here to write stories of hope and healing and, acceptance and recognition for my people. So transgender liberation is, what gets me out of bed after I've had my coffee. Is the reason I don't go back to bed, we'll put it that way.
Yes. Excellent. That's just as important, because I know I feel tempted to go back to bed sometimes.
I just pull my laptop in there with me and just work reclined. I'm just like, oh, this is the best.
Oh, yeah. I remember when I was working out of the fifth wheel trailer, that was my home and Anansi's first location for a long time. I would lie on the couch and I'd be like, this is like I'm on vacation. It's like after 5 p.m. I'm lying down and working now. This is what vacation is, right? It's not. You need actual rest.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes. Actual rest is a thing.
It's cozy. Yeah.
But cozy's resting nice. Throughout the workday makes me more productive. So
yes, totally. And sometimes being cozy while you work, pretty nice. Pretty nice.
Yep.
Yeah. All right. What would you say the number one thing that you do to preserve your wellness is?
The number one thing I do is absolutely the hardest thing for me to do, and that is to ask for what I need.
Ooh.
It is so uncomfortable to speak up and be like, hey, Kevin, can you get me this? Hey, guys, I have a question about this thing. Even with friends, I'm like, hey, I've stopped. My brain will either go completely blank in social situations or I'll have 7 different options. And I've learned to be with friends and be like, what do you mean by this? Can you clarify? What do you need right now? And instead of me just trying to guess and putting all that energy into figuring it out myself, just asking has so greatly improved my mental and emotional and physical health, because there's no longer that stress response, and absolutely has reduced cognitive load. And it's emotionally difficult every single time, but I'm getting there.
But it's worth it. Oh my God, that's one of the best questions. Yes. I so relate to that. That's one of the best answers I've ever gotten for how to preserve your wellness, or at least one of the ones that's closest to my heart. Because we all know, or we all hear all the time, things like exercise and meditation and eating well and taking time to rest or taking time to be in nature. And that's not to say those things aren't important.
That's boring. Those are things that I have made habits now. This is the thing I am actively practicing. And I always look at core values as things I have to actively practice, right? And this is the thing I actively practice to stay healthy.
Yes. I, hats off to you, because that's something I've been working on a lot, is learning because before expressing your needs, you need to identify what your needs are. You also have to let go of the expectation they'll just know. The other person will just know.
Oh,
right?
absolutely. And I have a weekly date night with myself where I actually sit down and check in. I'm like, what do I need? What needs aren't being met? What did I do really well this week? What conversations do I need to have with people? And I do that towards the end of the week, so I can do all that on the weekend and not be emotionally distraught during my work week. It's truly being in touch with your own needs is hard. But again, it's kind of like going back to cognitive load. It's worth doing that work there to figure out what you need, because it makes everything else easier in the long run.
Yeah. It's like physically training your core, how your core is kind of the thing that affects all those other things. Back pain, train your core. Shoulder and arm pain, okay, don't forget to train your core. It's kind of similar.
Train your core.
Yeah, it's similar. It's that it takes time and it's hard and it's uncomfortable, but the more you do it, the more it affects everything. It's something that is at the center of our relationships and our emotional well-being, in my opinion, which is a lot of life. A lot of life.
So true.
Yeah. All right, Caelin, are there any last words of wisdom that you want someone listening to this right now to walk away with?
Hire Anansi will help reduce your cognitive load.
Oh, that's awesome. I did not get them to do that. Okay. Like that was not scripted by me. Just putting that out there.
That was not saying I used to work in sales. I'm just like, let's just throw it in. But yes, if there's anybody out there listening, we're great at this. And yeah, I love talking about this stuff, and I love helping people with it, especially clients. So, and constructing those emotional journeys. So yeah, we'd love to anyone interested in this stuff.
Yeah, absolutely. Oh my gosh, now, of course, with my own excitement, I'm like, we need to change all of our marketing and like our tagline and stuff to just be like, we help reduce cognitive load around copy, systems, and marketing. Anyway, something to put into the quarterly planning talk. But it's really true, right? Like a lot of people think of us as like copywriters, we have good processes, etc. But what is the value of those processes put into practice for you? What is the value of having us do it instead of just, taking our upcoming Train Your Copywriters course and doing it yourself, is that we are all active practitioners and leaders who challenge each other to help reduce cognitive load for the people that we work with actively, both clients and partners. So yes, please hire us. We can help you. Or at least we can talk and see if we're a fit to help you, because we don't help everyone or work with everyone. Okay, this has been absolutely amazing. Thank you so much for coming on the show, for being vulnerable, for sharing about your experiences and the things that you've learned. This has been an excellent conversation. I know a lot of people will get value out of it.
So welcome, Say. I had such a great time, and I can't wait to do it again, hopefully one day.
Hey, yes, absolutely. Well, keep coming to me with amazing topics like this, and I am stoked to keep interviewing you because this has been a treat. All right. And anyone who's listening, as always, I hope that you got some value out of today. I hope that maybe you took something from this to maybe start to learn to identify when you're approaching cognitive overload, maybe do some things ahead of time that can move that overwhelm point further out by making things easier for you. Or if you're currently in a state of cognitive overload, maybe, just maybe, you might be able to identify what you need and express it to somebody. I know it's hard, especially hard when you're tired. Even if you can't do any of that stuff, I hope that you can at least find a moment today to just breathe a little deeper, feel a little easier, and have an excellent moment of enjoyment. All right, guys, take care.